I'm so glad to be here with you.
I'm sorry. You take care now, all right?
My mother called me at 6:42 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. I had been making coffee. The kitchen had still been mostly dark. I had not heard my mother's voice in almost 2 years. I had not been certain, when I had seen her name on the screen of my phone, whether I was going to answer. I had answered on the 4th ring. She had been sobbing. She had been the kind of crying that takes a long time to form words around. I had stood at my counter with the small black phone in my hand and had waited. She had finally said, "Romola, please come home. We need you to come home. Your father needs you to come home. We have been wrong." I had not asked what they had been wrong about. I had known what they had been wrong about. I had been waiting for 2 years for the call. I had been preparing, in the small, careful way you prepare for things you have been told will probably never happen, for the moment my mother would finally say those exact words. I had told her I would come. I had not told her when. I had hung up. I want to tell you what I found when I had finally driven to my parents' house, 4 days later, after I had given myself the time to figure out what kind of daughter I was going to be when I walked in. I want to tell you what my father had been holding when I had walked into the kitchen, and what the number at the bottom of the page had been, and what I had said to my parents before I had walked back out. I want to tell you because there are people listening to this who have been falsely accused by their own sibling, who have been cut off by their parents without a single question being asked, and who have been waiting for the day the truth would come out, while also figuring out, slowly, that the coming out of the truth might not change as much as they had imagined it would. Before I do, hit subscribe, and tell me one thing in the comments. Tell me about a time somebody in your family chose to believe a lie about you, when asking you a single question would have revealed the truth. Tell me how long the lie was believed. I read every comment. Now let me back up to 2 years before the morning call, because the backup is the foundation of the rest of this story. My name is Romola Karpenko. I am 33 years old. I am a senior data analyst at a small healthcare consulting firm in Pittsburgh. I have been with the firm for the past 7 years. I work primarily on health insurance claims data, looking for patterns of fraud, billing irregularities, and small statistical anomalies that indicate something has been going wrong inside a system. The work has been useful for what I am about to tell you. The work has, in particular, trained me to notice things that look normal at first glance, but are not when you look at them closely. My sister Vesna is 29. She is 4 years younger than me. She has been our parents' favored daughter for as long as I can remember. The favoring had not been subtle. The favoring had been the small daily organizing principle of our family. Vesna had been the daughter our parents had bragged about. I had been the daughter who had been mentioned, when I had been mentioned at all, as a kind of supporting fact about the family rather than as a person in my own right. The pattern had been, by the time I had been an adult, exhausting in the small daily way these patterns become exhausting when you have been living inside them for 30 years. 2.5 years ago, my sister had begun, in a series of small, careful conversations with our parents, to suggest that I had been stealing from them. She had not made a single dramatic accusation. She had simply, over a period of about 6 months, brought up small details. She had told our mother, in a casual way, that she had been worried because she had noticed that some of the cash our father had been keeping in the small drawer of his desk had been disappearing. She had mentioned, in another conversation, that she had seen me looking through our mother's jewelry box during a recent visit, which had not been true. She had told our father, on a different evening, that one of his small silver coin collections had been missing several pieces, and that she had been wondering whether I had been visiting often enough to have had access to it. Each individual claim had been small. The claims had been the kind of claims that did not require evidence to investigate. They had been the kind of claims that just accumulated. By the end of the 6 months, my parents had been operating on the assumption that I had been quietly stealing from them. They had not asked me about any of it. They had not confronted me. They had simply, in the small, careful way some parents respond to information they have been receiving from a daughter they prefer, begun to make decisions about me without telling me. The decisions had included, over the course of the following 2 months, the removal of me from their will, the closing of a small joint savings account they had been maintaining for me since I had been a child, which had contained about $8,000, the transfer of a small piece of property they had been planning to leave to me, which had been a small 2-acre lot in upstate New York that my grandfather had bought in 1962, to my sister's name. The cancellation of my access to the small family vacation home they had been letting me use, in central Pennsylvania, for the previous 6 years. The disinviting of me from the family holiday gatherings, which had been communicated to me through a small text message from my mother that had said, in 3 sentences, that she and my father had decided to keep the holidays small that year, and that they would be having only my sister and her family over. I had been confused by all of this. I had asked my mother on a phone call what had changed. She had told me, in the careful voice she had been using on me my whole life, that nothing had changed and that I was reading too much into normal family adjustments. She had told me my father had been struggling with some health issues and that they had been simplifying their affairs. She had told me I should not worry about it. I had let it go for a few months. The not worrying about it had been the trained response of a daughter who had been raised, my whole life, to not push back on what my mother had told me about what was happening in the family. The not letting it go had finally happened when my parents had stopped responding to my phone calls altogether. By that point, I had been calling them about every 2 weeks, and they had been not calling me back. And the not calling back had eventually clarified for me that something specific had been happening that I had not been told about. I had driven to their house on a Saturday morning, unannounced, 2 years and 3 months before the call my mother had made at 6:42 in the morning. I had walked up to the front door. I had rung the doorbell. My father had answered. My father had been wearing a small flannel shirt and the small reading glasses he had been using for the previous decade. He had been holding a cup of coffee. He had been surprised to see me. I had asked him, in the small, careful voice I had been using since I had been a child, whether I could come in. He had said, in a voice that had not been his voice, that this was not a good time and that I should call before coming over. He had closed the door. I had stood on the front porch of the house I had grown up in for about a minute. I had then walked back to my car. I had driven home. I had sat in my apartment for the rest of the afternoon. I had cried in the small, quiet way you cry when you have realized that your own father has just closed a door on you without an explanation. I had then, in the small, clear way I have made important decisions throughout my adult life, decided that I was going to find out what had been happening. I want to tell you what I had figured out in the next 6 weeks, because the figuring out had been the foundation of everything that happened later. I had not used my professional skills to investigate, because the professional skills would have been inappropriate to use on my own family. I had used a small, careful set of public record searches and a series of conversations with extended family members and old family friends who had been willing to talk to me even when my parents had not been. I had assembled, over those 6 weeks, a clear picture of what had happened. The picture had been that my sister Vesna had been telling our parents for several months that I had been stealing from them. My uncle Devor, my father's younger brother, had been the one who had finally told me about the accusations. He had told me on a phone call. He had been apologetic. He had told me he had not believed Vesna when our parents had told him what she had been saying. He had told me he had been trying to push back against the story with our parents, but that they had not been receptive. He had told me he had been waiting to see if I had been going to figure out what had happened on my own, and that he had been wondering whether to call me. I had thanked him for the call. I had then, in the small, clarifying way the information had landed in me, understood the full picture. I had not gone back to my parents' house. I had not called them to defend myself. I had not asked them to verify what Vesna had been telling them. I had made a different decision. I had decided to disappear. I want to tell you what I mean by disappearing because the disappearing had been deliberate and structured. I had stopped calling my parents. I had stopped trying to reach them. I had blocked my sister on every platform. I had not blocked my parents because I had wanted them to be able to reach me if they ever changed their minds, but I had stopped initiating contact. I had told my closest cousin Bora, who had been close to my mother, that I had not been stealing from anybody, that the accusations had been entirely false, and that I would not be defending myself to a family that had not bothered to ask me a single question before cutting me off. I had told her she could share this with whoever she wanted to. She had shared it. The sharing had not changed anything. My parents had continued to believe Vesna. I had then, in the small, careful way I had been organizing my life, used the 2 years that followed to build, more deliberately than I had ever built before, the life I wanted to have. I had been promoted at work. I had been promoted twice, actually. My salary had gone up by about 38% over the 2 years. I had moved into a slightly nicer apartment. I had started seeing a therapist who specialized in family of origin work. I had started a small running practice, which had eventually grown into the small, careful habit of training for a half marathon that I had finally completed about 6 months into the estrangement. I had built deeper friendships with several people I had previously only been casual with. I had started a small cooking project in which I had been working through my grandmother's old recipe book, which I had inherited from her when she had died years ago, and which had been one of the few family heirlooms my parents had not been able to take back from me. I had also started saving aggressively. The aggressive saving had not been because I had been planning anything specific. The aggressive saving had been because I had decided, in the small, clarifying way the family situation had clarified my priorities, that I did not want to be financially dependent on anybody in the world. I had not been dependent on my family financially in any direct way for years, but I had been carrying, somewhere in the back of my mind, the small assumption that the family would eventually help me with things like a down payment on a house or the cost of a wedding. The estrangement had ended that assumption. The ending had been useful. The aggressive saving had been the small material response. I had been doing all of this when the call came at 6:42 in the morning. I want to tell you what had happened in my parents' household during those 2 years that had led to the call, because the 4 days between the call and my visit had given me time to find out the details from my uncle Devor, who had been keeping me apprised. What had happened was that my sister Vesna had been, during the same period she had been accusing me of stealing from our parents, actually stealing from our parents herself. The stealing had not been the same kind of stealing she had been accusing me of. The stealing had been much larger, much more sophisticated, and much more devastating. Vesna had been added 3 years earlier as a joint signatory on several of our parents' financial accounts, in a routine arrangement my parents had set up in case of medical emergencies. Vesna had used the joint signatory access to make small, careful transfers over the previous 3 years, from my parents' accounts to her own accounts, in amounts that had ranged from $1,000 per transfer at first to $15,000 per transfer by the end. The total amount, by the time my parents had discovered what was happening, had been approximately $346,000. My parents had discovered the situation when their financial advisor, an older man named Mr. Theron Lindquist, who had been managing their retirement accounts for 2 decades, had called my father on a Wednesday afternoon to discuss the unusual pattern of withdrawals he had been observing. The advisor had been polite. He had not accused Vesna of anything. He had simply asked my father to come into the office to review the recent activity. My father had gone to the office. The advisor had walked him through the statements. The statements had been clear. The withdrawals had been authorized by Vesna's signature. The destinations of the funds had been traceable. The amount had been catastrophic. My father had not slept that night. My father had spent the entire night, my uncle Devor told me later, sitting at the kitchen table looking at the printouts of the statements the advisor had given him. My mother had found him there at 4 in the morning. He had told her, in the small voice he had not used in front of her in 40 years of marriage, what the statements had said. They had not confronted Vesna immediately. They had spent the next 3 days, my uncle told me, calling other financial institutions, gathering additional records, and assembling a complete picture of what had happened. The complete picture had been worse than the initial picture. The complete picture had included not just the direct transfers from their retirement accounts, but also a small home equity line of credit Vesna had taken out against the family vacation home in central Pennsylvania, using a power of attorney my parents had granted her 3 years earlier for a different purpose, and which had still been in effect. The home equity line had added another $62,000 to the total. The grand total had been just over $408,000. My parents had then, on the 3rd day, called the police. The police had referred them to the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office had referred them to a small, careful, older lawyer named Ms. Halia Volkov, who had specialized in elder financial abuse for the previous 23 years. Ms. Volkov had been the one who had told my parents what they were going to have to do. My parents had then, on the morning of the 4th day, called Vesna. They had asked her to come to the house. They had confronted her with the statements. Vesna had, after about an hour of denials, finally admitted to most of what she had done. She had not admitted to all of it. She had admitted to enough. My parents had asked her to leave the house. She had left. They had then, after she had gone, sat at the kitchen table together for several hours. My mother had called me at 6:42 the next morning. I want to tell you about the 4 days I had given myself before I had driven to the house. The 4 days had been important. The 4 days had been the time I had needed to figure out what kind of daughter I was going to be when I walked through the door. I had spent the first day, the day of the phone call, mostly walking around my neighborhood with my coffee cooling in my hand. I had spent the second day talking on the phone with my therapist, who had told me she could see me for an emergency session if I needed it. I had taken her up on the offer. The session had been useful. I had spent the 3rd day talking to my closest friend Pelagia, who had been a friend since college, and who had been one of the few people in my life who had known the full story of the estrangement. Pelagia had been steady. Pelagia had asked me good questions. The questions had helped me clarify what I had been thinking. On the fourth day, I had been ready. I had driven to my parents' house. I had parked in the small driveway I had not been in for 2 years. I had walked up the front porch. I had rung the doorbell. My father had answered. He had been holding a single piece of paper. The piece of paper had been a bank statement. The statement had been from one of the joint accounts Vesna had been draining. The statement had been a recent one. The balance at the bottom of the page had been $416. The account had originally had, my uncle had told me, approximately $330,000 in it. My father had been holding the statement in his right hand. His hand had been trembling. He had not been crying. He had been past crying. He had been in the small, flat state that comes after a person has been crying for several days and has run out of the capacity to keep crying. He had been wearing the same flannel shirt I remembered from the morning he had closed the door on me 2 years and 3 months earlier. He had been wearing the same reading glasses. He had aged, in the 2 years, about a decade. He had stepped back from the door. He had let me in. He had walked me into the kitchen. My mother had been sitting at the table. She had been the one who had been crying. She had stood up when she had seen me. She had walked toward me. I had stepped back. I had not been ready to hug her. She had stopped. She had nodded. She had sat back down. My father had set the bank statement on the table. He had said, in a voice that had been the smallest I had ever heard him use, "Romola, we were wrong. I am sorry. We have been wrong about everything. I am sorry." I had not sat down. I want you to understand. I had not sat down because I had decided, in the 4 days between the call and the visit, that I was not going to come back into my parents' kitchen as the daughter who was about to comfort them. The decision had been the central decision of the 4 days. The decision had been the thing I had been working out with my therapist and with Pelagia. The decision had been the thing that had taken the 4 days to settle into. I had stood next to the table. I had looked at the bank statement. I had looked at my father. I had said in the small, clear voice I had been preparing, "Dad, I am sorry about what Vesna did. I am sorry about what you are about to have to go through. I am not, however, going to be the daughter who comes back into this family because Vesna's lies finally collapsed. I am not going to be the daughter who steps back into the role I was in before the estrangement. I want you to understand that I am here today, in your kitchen, because Mom called me crying, and because I had been hoping you would call me eventually, and because I had wanted to see your faces one time before I decided what kind of relationship I was going to have with the two of you going forward. The relationship is going to be limited. The relationship is not going to be the relationship we had before. The relationship is going to be the relationship of two people who failed me as parents, and who I am going to be in contact with on terms that I set, in amounts that I decide, with conversations I get to choose. I am telling you this now, in your kitchen, because I want you to know it before I leave today. I am not asking for an apology. The apology you just gave me was not enough. I am not going to be making lists of what would be enough. The being enough is your work to figure out. The figuring out is going to take you years. I am not going to be your daughter while you figure it out. I am going to be a distant relative who calls every few months. The being more than a distant relative is something you are going to have to earn back, in slow, careful work, over the rest of your lives. I do not know if you will earn it. I am not promising you will. I am only telling you what the structure is going to be. My mother had been crying again. My father had nodded. He had not argued. He had not asked me to reconsider. He had been, in the small, careful way some fathers finally become themselves after several decades of failing to be, the kind of man who could hear what I was saying and not try to negotiate with me about it. He had said, "Romola, I understand. I want you to know I am proud of you. I have not had the right to say that for a long time. I am saying it now. I am proud of the daughter we did not deserve. I am sorry we did not deserve you." I had not responded to that. I had been quiet for a moment. I had then turned. I had walked back out of the kitchen. I had walked back through the front hallway. I had let myself out the front door. I had driven home. I want to tell you what has happened in the 8 months since. Vesna has been charged with elder financial abuse and embezzlement. She is awaiting trial. The trial is scheduled for early next year. Ms. Volkov, my parents' lawyer, has told them the case is strong and that conviction is likely. The expected sentence range is between 4 and 7 years in state prison. My parents have lost most of what they had saved. The recovery of the funds is unlikely. About $80,000 has been recovered so far, through frozen accounts and a small settlement with one of Vesna's accounts. The rest of the money is, in the language Ms. Volkov has used, probably gone. My parents are going to have to sell the vacation home. They are going to have to scale down their retirement. They are going to be working into their late 70s in small consulting roles to make ends meet. The damage is significant. I have been in contact with them in the limited way I had described in the kitchen. We have a phone call about once every 6 weeks. The calls are short. The calls are polite. The calls are not warm. I do not visit. I have not invited them to my apartment. I have not seen them in person since the morning in the kitchen. My uncle Devore has been a quiet presence throughout. He has been calling me every few weeks. He has been telling me he is proud of me. He has been telling me that he has been disappointed in my parents for years, and that the estrangement had clarified things for him too. He has become, in a small, careful way, the family member I have actually been in regular contact with. He has been like the father I had been needing in the years my actual father had been failing to be one. I want to tell you what I have learned because the learning has been the part of the experience that I have been thinking about most carefully. The first thing I have learned is that the people who chose to believe a lie about you, when asking you a single question would have revealed the truth, are not going to get to skip the consequences of having made that choice. The consequences are not yours to administer. The consequences are not, in most cases, anything you have to actively impose. The consequences arrive, slowly and unevenly, in the form of the slow erosion of trust, the small daily realization on the other person's part that they had been the kind of person who would make that choice, and the years of relationship that they had thrown away by making it. You do not have to confront the people who chose the lie. You do not have to make them apologize. You do not have to demand they understand. The people will, over time, come to understand on their own. The understanding will be more useful, in the long run, than any confrontation you could have orchestrated. The understanding will be the work of the rest of their lives. The work is theirs to do. You do not have to participate in it. You can, instead, build your own life. The life is what they will eventually have to reckon with, from the outside, when they finally realize that you have become a person they no longer have access to. The access was the thing they took for granted. The losing of the access is the consequence they will spend the rest of their lives understanding. The second thing I have learned is that the moment the truth finally comes out is not the moment of reunion. The moment the truth finally comes out is the moment when you get to decide whether to come back, and on what terms. The decision is the entire thing. The terms are the entire thing. The terms are the difference between the kind of family that uses the moment of truth to rebuild on the old foundation, which is the foundation that produced the lie, and the kind of family that uses the moment to build something different. The old foundation was the foundation of unconditional belief in the favored child and unconditional skepticism of the unfavored child. The old foundation has been weakened by the revelation of what the favored child actually did. The old foundation is not, however, automatically going to be replaced by a better foundation. The replacing requires somebody in the family to refuse to step back onto the old foundation. The refusing is hard. The refusing is the small, clear decision you have to make in your parents' kitchen, while your father is holding a bank statement and your mother is crying, that the apology you are receiving is not enough to justify the rebuilding of the old structure. The apology might be sincere. The apology might be heartfelt. The apology might be the best apology your parents have ever given anybody. The apology is not enough. The apology can be received without being used as the basis of a return to the old structure. The receiving and the not returning are two separate things. The two separate things, kept separate, are what allow the people who failed you to begin the slow, careful work of becoming people who would not have failed you, while protecting you from being the project they are working on. You should not be their project. You are not their redemption. You are a person whose life they failed to build properly, who has now built it herself, and who gets to decide whether to invite them into any portion of the life she has built. The deciding is yours. The deciding is the only thing the moment of truth gives you. The deciding is what you take, and the rest is what they have to learn to live without. The third thing I have learned, and the last one I want to give you, is that the family members who quietly believed you, during the years you were being lied about, are sometimes the most important people in the rest of your life. My uncle Devore had not been close to me before the estrangement. He had been a distant uncle. He had been the kind of family member I had seen at large holiday gatherings and had not spoken with much at any of them. He had become, during the 2 years of the estrangement, one of the most important people in my adult life. He had been the one who had called me when nobody else had been calling me. He had been the one who had pushed back against my parents when nobody else had been pushing back. He had been the one who had told me, repeatedly and without being asked, that he had not believed Vesna's accusations, and that he had been waiting to see if I had needed help. The help had been the small, careful kind of help that does not require much. Regular phone calls, The steady acknowledgement that he had known I had not been the kind of person who would have stolen from anybody. The small, careful kindness of an uncle who had refused to be part of the family lie. If somebody in your family is being lied about by another family member, and you are watching from the side and you know the lie is a lie, please consider that the watching from the side is not enough. The watching from the side is the small daily complicity that keeps the lie alive. The not being silent is the small daily contribution you can make to keeping the truth alive in your family, even when the loudest voices in your family are trying to drown the truth out. You may not be in a position to confront the liar directly. You may not be in a position to convince the family to abandon the lie. You can, however, call the person being lied about. You can tell them you do not believe what is being said. You can be a quiet, steady presence in their life during the years they are being treated as somebody they are not. The being a presence is not glamorous. The being a presence is not dramatic. The being a presence is, however, sometimes the difference between the lied about person making it through the years of the lie with their sense of self intact, or not. The sense of self intact is the gift you can give. The giving costs you almost nothing. The cost to the lied about person, if you do not give it, can be enormous. Please give it. Please be the uncle who keeps calling. Please be the cousin who never believed it. Please be the family friend who reaches out. The reaching out is the small, careful work that holds families together during the years when the families themselves have stopped working. The work matters. The work is, in many cases, the only thing that keeps the lied about person tethered to the truth about who they are. The tethering is everything. Please be the one who tethers.